I'm only miming, it's okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Scrutiny Executive meeting. Do you have any apologies?
Chair, I've received no apologies.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just a few house rules before we start. Half tongue-in-cheek, half serious. Please try to be succinct. Please try to avoid pedantry. No drones allowed. And if we apply ourselves to these, the meeting will run smoothly and successfully. I have one announcement.
Chair, could I ask you? I didn't understand some of the words you used. Would you say it in a little bit more plain English, please?
Succinctly.
Pedantry.
Succinctly. You understand the word succinctly, Rob?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
And pedantry. I think it's just trying to focus on the point in question. Okay. Right. In terms of one announcement, future meetings, the Cabinet meet at 4 o'clock on an afternoon, and having spoken to a number of members contacting me, I am announcing that future meetings, until we possibly move back into the Council House or until things change, we will proceed with 5 o'clock meetings from now on. Okay, late items. I've got two late items, the performance venue and the silk mill. What I'm proposing to do is that we go through the agenda for the Executive Scrutiny Board, and then when we move on to the Council Cabinet meeting, we deal with item 9 first, and then we'll segue into the late items. One, the performance venue, that's the late item, and then secondly, the paper on the silk mill. Okie dokie. Any declarations of interest?
Chair,
okay, if there's no one. Sorry?
Chair, it's Lucy Kerr. I'd just like to mention that I'm one of the Council's appointees to the Derby Museums Board. So I don't need to declare an interest because I'm appointed from the Council, but it is something that I've been involved in. Okay,
thank you for that, Lucy. Minutes of the previous meeting. You've all got copies of those. I wasn't there myself, but are they an accurate reflection of that meeting for those that were there? Or those that were there, do you have any concerns with those in terms of accuracy or content? Okay, if not, so we'll take those as read. Is that okay, Alex?
Chair, it's Stephen here. Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, item 5, forward plan. Who's going to take us through this? Hello?
I think it's just worth mentioning, Chair, that a forward plan was circulated on the 7th of July.
Okay.
And if I have a quick look at it, there was only actually a difference between the two documents. There was just a new item added to the one on the 7th of July, which is the procurement of short breaks stroke respite for adults.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments at all from any members? If not, we can move on from that. Moving on to item 6, Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. Again, any comments from any members? Lucy, did you want to come in?
Just that it was nice to have been listened to last time. There were quite a lot of things which they accepted.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And if there's no more comments, then we'll note that. So then we'll move on to item, where are we now? Council Cabinet forward plan. Item 7, we're on to the council agenda. So, what do we start off with are the recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board, item 7. I think that is just for noting at this stage, is it not, Stephen?
Chair, yes, unless any of the members wish to comment on any of the items of the agenda, then you may want to go straight to either item 8 or your late items, whatever you choose.
Okay. Right, thank you very much. Well, that's the recommendation. Are people happy with item 7? So yes, thank you very much. So moving on to the 2 items that we'll deal with first of all, I think we agreed we're going to deal with item 9, and then we're going to move on to the new performance venue. So item 9 is the final accounts, the 2019-20 outturn. Report for the General Fund, Capital Programme, Treasury Management, Housing Revenue Account, Dedicated Schools Grant and the Collection Fund. I've got 1 or 2 comments to make before I start. Anybody that wishes to jump in and make a few comments?
Could you just slow down a moment, please, Chair, because you've got lots of bits of paper. I'm struggling between screens.
Yeah, okay,
I'm
fine.
electronic, and other people might be struggling too.
Okay, so we're on to item 9.
Hang on, I'm at the bottom of my sheet.
Okay, no rush. I'll let people get access to their item 9. And then if 1 or 2 of you can indicate when you're ready to.
Because was the item 8 through you, Chair, Property Improvement Capital Works Programme? Have we zoomed through that one?
No, we're going back to item 8 later on, Lucy. We brought forward item 9 and the late item on the performance venue. I think that the 2 may segue into each other. Then we'll go back to the rest of the agenda. So it'll be item 9, the late item on the performance venue, and the paper on the silk note. So it's item 9 first of all. Okay. Has everybody got those papers in front of them? I'm taking that as a yes. Anything on page 1? Page 1, 2 or 3, 4 or 5?
I've got. So I don't know what your protocol is, Martin. I put a thing indicating I had wanted to ask a few questions, but Chair,
okay.
Sorry, Chair. But are you okay for me? I've got a question on page 4, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's just.
Councillor Epps, if I just might intervene briefly, I think the accepted custom and practice for this committee is for the chair to invite an officer to present the report and give an overview of what the report contains, and then members of the board can ask questions after that. So I think for the purposes of this report, I expect it will be Simon Riley, but I'm sure other colleagues will confirm. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. We'll invite Simon to actually speak to the paper, and then Stephen, I'll take your question with regard to item 9. So, Simon, if you can talk to the paper, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll try and be succinct. Members will recognise this as the standard report that you receive at the end of the financial year, which mirrors the quarterly revenue and capital monitoring report, what we bring during the year. During last year, we obviously experienced at the beginning of Q1 a budget pressure, primarily in the area of children's social care. That's common with many authorities. And that's obviously sort of we worked out to try and mitigate and manage the impact of that and other demand pressures during the year. The final outturn was down on what we anticipated at Q3 and ended up with a 6.195 million overspend that is being funded from reserves. On the capital programme, the capital programme was reprofiled where required during the year, and we delivered 82% of the final agreed capital programme, and the report details explanations for variances in respect of that. Some good news on things like the housing revenue account, where sort of it's had an improved position, and again dedicated schools grants, where lots of councils are experiencing excessive pressures on their dedicated schools grants, especially around high needs block. Again, some quite good success in ending up with a deficit of 250,000, which is pleasing. The report details, as you will be aware, many different explanations of the variances. It tries to be open and transparent about our financial position of last year, and obviously I asked members to be considering this in light of also the performance report, which is what these resources deliver for the council. So I don't intend going through page by page, but I'm happy to try and answer questions as directed by the chair. Have we lost the chair?
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. If I can now invite Stephen to ask questions with regard to this item. Stephen.
Yeah, how would you like me to run it, Chair? Would you like me to just ask all my questions in one go and then the officers answer them?
Yes, please.
I'll do that, that's fine, yeah. So firstly, if we go to page, I'm using an iPad here with my thing on, page 5, we put the comment in section 4, paragraph 412. I'm just interested because you make a big thing in this that it's a balanced budget, but obviously I'm just wondering how we can claim, or the council can claim it's a balanced budget when the council's obviously had to dip in to reserves, because that doesn't really smack of overall of a balanced budget when you're having to, to sort of dip into the reserve. So that's my first question. Hold on a minute, just bear with me a minute, my iPad went on to something else there. The other bit then is on page sorry, I'm getting Siri coming up wanting to talk to me. Page 10, paragraph 465, where you talk about a slippage and moving across that slippage into the 2021 capital programme. Will that underspend be obviously be carried across into the budget for this year then, where you've got the underspend this year? Is that going to go across into the budget for this year? And then also on page 15, paragraph 4640, I'm just wondering why we need a sort of money towards the refurbished assembly rooms when obviously the plan's been scrapped, and it goes into some detail there in 4640, and then you make a statement on page 18 on paragraph 475 about the future trading arrangements with the EU, and you paint a good pitch. You paint quite a good picture as I read it from that paragraph. But what consideration have you given to the impact on what could very likely be a no deal ultimately at the end of this transition year, because the national government are not going to extend it, and the clock is running out. So those are my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Over to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you for that. Taking them in turn, the council has always operated a medium-term financial plan and has reserves, and the legal definition of a balanced budget is that you have sufficient resources to meet the financial needs of the council. Throughout all of our budget monitoring, we've been talking about both in setting the budget and also in quarterly monitoring, that in order to deliver the resources required, we'd have to draw down from reserves. In local government parlance, that is called a balanced budget, though obviously we've had to draw on some of our reserves to fund the activities that we have. But that is a balanced budget in the definition of the accounting rules that we operate in. In terms of the capital slippage, you can see there in that paragraph it talked about something like 18 million underspend against the approved programme, of which 14 million gets slipped into next year. That is obviously, we've made some savings on the core capital programme, but 14 million and its associated funding transfers between financial years. So that will be added to the approved capital programme that you set in February of this year and will allow us to deliver our capital objectives and our capital plans. The third question, which was about the assembly rooms and the refurbishment, members would be aware that there has been a series of costs detailed in the report in terms of surveys and other work in the assembly rooms, which the report details how much that was, and what we had to do when the decision was made to not progress with the assembly room refurbishments is, in accordance with accounting principles, determine what was specific to that building that will not have any future value in terms of things like surveys that will tell us asbestos in the building and everything else, which has value in terms of informing the demolition, and what will have value in terms of the next steps, which is the planned sort of a demolition of the assembly rooms. In principle, that was about 50% were abortive, had to be treated as revenue expenditure funded from reserves, and 50% can be carried forward as a capital expenditure to facilitate the demolition. So that paragraph is primarily about the accounting treatment in accordance with the best financial principles that we have. And the final question from Councillor Willoughby is about the trading arrangements with Europe. And obviously during last year there was lots of volatility in the market as there was uncertainty about the future status of Britain's trading relationships and position in Europe. But this is in a section about treasury management, and I think every commentator is saying that they do not see a no-deal exit leading to a significant increase in the interest rates in the next, say, couple of years. And therefore this is really contextual and is not about the operational merits or demerits of Brexit. It's about the financial markets and how they have responded, both at the point of the decision by the UK government and also where we think it's going to go in the future. And to be honest, the view of the markets is that it will not lead to great volatility in terms of the cost of money, borrowing and investment returns. We'll wait to see how this, combined with other global economic realignments, may impact it, but this is primarily a retro or a backward-looking report about how we managed our treasury during the year. Hopefully they're comprehensive but succinct answers to Councillor Willoughby's questions.
Thank you very much, Simon. I will take Richard, Councillor Hudson. I think you wanted to ask a question.
Hello, thank you, Chair. When I first looked at this document, which is the 2019-20 outturn report, I treated it with great scepticism because on the back of this, a budget was set in February with everything rolling, but quite a lot has happened since March. I can only imagine how chaotic the spend has been across the council. I'd imagine some department spend have gone up, some have probably flatlined. What is the relevance of the data I'm looking at now in July 2020 based on something for the last financial year?
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. I think that is a really good question. Obviously, what my role is to promote as effective and high quality financial management across the organisation in managing in-year spend as well as planning definitely for the next 3 years in the medium-term financial plan. The impact of COVID, the impact of the COVID episode on the economy, on the community and everything else has been major, and I brought a report to a previous meeting of Cabinet that was considered by Exec Scrutiny in June, which talked about our very effective response. I draw members maybe to come and listen to the Corporate Scrutiny panel next week, where we're exploring more of the financial impact of COVID. But what this, if you want to call it, is probably setting the context of what resources we have to try and meet that challenge. And I suppose if I've got to be honest, I'm pleased that we managed to contain the overspend as it was last year when we had pressures, especially in terms of children's social care, because if we had to draw down more on reserves, it means there's less reserves to help us through this very difficult time. But maybe picking up Councillor Hudson's view, it is, I won't say chaotic, but it is probably the most challenging time for local government nationally that we have had in terms of the finances, the uncertainty, and also how much of this is going to impact for future years, I don't think any of us can actually, with certainty, forecast that. And our crystal balls are being shined every day to try and get an insight into many different services. But I have to give credit to our managers and to our councillors. I think Derby is stepping up really well in managing that COVID response and the money that we spend on it.
Right, thank you, Simon. I'm going to make a contribution, and then I'm going to take Fareed, Rob, and then Lucy. A couple of things I want to say. In recent years, seems to have been a growing and worrying tendency by some politicians to ignore expert professional advice. And sadly, we've seen this nationally in recent months. And now we seem to be seeing this locally with regard to the future of the assembly rooms. And as a result, there's always a price to pay. In Derby, the price is a staggering £2.5 million. And that's contained in both item 9 and the late item with regard to the performance venue. People in Derby, as well as many councillors, feel they were misled, and they were told refurbishment would be easy. It would only cost a fraction of what the true refurbishment figure was and turned out to be. Experts and officers told the current administration that refurbishment was not the best option. They were advised that demolition and a new build was in fact the best way forward. And certain councillors and all these facts ignored this advice and ploughed on regardless. Other councillors were apparently kept in the dark. I just said, in terms of Simon, it must be frustrating when, I don't know if you were at the time, but I know, because I was, as were many others, and I respect all those councillors who genuinely thought the refurbishment was a good option if it was going to cost 250,000, 2 million, 3 million. In actual fact, if it was 2.5 million, 3 million, I possibly would have supported it myself. But I, for one, knew all the facts, but there are a number of councillors who didn't. How do I mean, it's wrong of me to ask you as an officer because I put you in this position. So I'm really raising this and I will be making a recommendation later on to the leader and deputy leader of the council that we need a far more. I think we need to be sanguine about what's happened. I think we need to learn from what's happened, and we need to move on in a positive way. Right, I'll take now Fareed. Fareed, over to you. Then Rob, and then Lucy.
Yeah. My question is on overspend on children's services. I mean, I know nationally most councils have been struggling to contain the budget as it regards children's services. The costs have been rising, the demand has been going up, and that's also true of Derby. But last year we overspent by just over 6 million. Why have we not put that money in the base budget instead of bailing out the council from reserves again because we haven't put enough money in the budget in the first place? What is the thinking behind that when we know that it's not easy to contain the spend because the numbers are rising, the cost of providing services is going up? So realistically, I've not seen a plan which sets out a case in terms of how the spend might be contained. And if we can tell at the outset that we are going to overspend, then isn't that slightly against the rules of budget setting, that where we can anticipate an expenditure in advance, we should actually put it in the base budget instead of relying on reserves to bail us out at the end of the year again?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Hussain. That is at the essence of what budget forecasting is about. I think members will recall that in Q4 of 2018-19 and Q1 of 19-20, the year that this report relates to, we had a major impact from unaccompanied asylum seekers and Laverstock Court, which created more children that we had duty to look after. And I'm sure every member understands that looked after children is a statutory responsibility that we need to try and find the best care setting for those people to be under. And when you have a look at the figures, a large proportion of that initial increase in numbers was in relation to unaccompanied asylum seeker children coming into our care. And that was something that we made representations to central government on, and also the provider of Laverstock Court. I think if I've got to be honest, the looked after children numbers across the country are increasing, and that might be a reflection of society, it might be a reflection on family breakdown and other aspects, and we've got a situation where our numbers increased from, I think it was about in the low 500s at the beginning of last year, up to about 577 when the budget was set, to just shy of 600 by the end of the financial year. And we need to find the most suitable placement for these people. This council has, as I think you may know from the advertising for fostering and everything else, is trying to reshape it so we can have foster care in the city, which is better for the children, which is also cheaper for the council to run. But what we do every year is to try and assess what we think the demand will be, what the cost will be. But budget forecasting for statutory service is as good as a forecasting. But if, as an example is, we've had 2 families recently come into care with 11 siblings between them, we don't have a choice about providing care for them, and we have to respond with the most appropriate care package. So we do, and I'll say this with sincerity, we do try and in a sense forecast as best as we can, but we have to meet that demand as it comes along. And the budget that was set for this year, I think built in, it was about £6 million more in respect to children's social care, recognising the previous demand. And again, we'll have to have a look when we set the budget for next year about what we need to build in and how we can set a balanced budget. So I understand the sentiment of what you're saying, but actually this is not a fixed cohort of children that we're looking after, and we're constantly looking at how we can try and manage demand and cost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Right, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Riley, as we see from the document that the income and the budget has been propped up pretty much and dipped into the reserves by over £6 million. If the council carried on dipping into the reserves, how long would it be sustainable to do so? Or, well, that's probably not the worst word, sustainable. How long could the council carry that on for? And with the next, are we going to see the same outturn document where we're going to see reserves being used to prop up the budget? Is that likely? What is the likelihood that we'd have to do that in the next financial outturn report?
So, thank you, Councillor Cooper, and I like being called Mr. Riley. That's very nice. Appendix 1 talks about the statement of reserves, and that's on page 28. And the council holds a variety of reserves in what is called general fund and earmark reserves. So our general fund balance, which is what we try and keep for the unknown surprises, is just shy of 11 million. And there's 13 million in budget risk reserve. Obviously, that budget risk reserve got reduced at the end of the year by the £6 million. So previously it would have been 19 million. And if we keep on having to draw down reserves by 6 million each year, that would obviously be used up in 2 years' time. And all you would have is, if you want to call it your general fund balance and some earmarked reserves. The challenge, to be honest, to all councillors is in this year we have had the biggest of all shocks, if you want to call it the rainy day situation of COVID, where the government has not yet fully funded all of the cost of COVID, which will probably mean that we will have to call on reserves in excess of what we had planned, though we keep on lobbying the government for more money. And that means that this reserve position is that we have to try as much as is physically possible to try and contain our expenditure within the budget we set. But I think I'll be saying in Q1 monitoring that we will be drawing down on reserves. But with everything going on this year, I probably can't give a 100% guarantee that that will not increase or decrease in the year as we learn more about our response to COVID, the impact on the city, the impact on people's ability to pay for services, the cost of providing services like social care, etc. So it is a challenge, and we're probably in about the middle of the pack in terms of reserves for unitary councils. So we haven't got a lot, but we're not. We haven't got the least. We're probably in the middle of the pack, but it won't take many years of overspends to start really putting those reserves into what I'd call the minimum level that we should retain.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on to Lucy.
Thank you. Can I start by saying it's really nice to have the accounts complete so quickly in the year, despite I no doubt people are being furloughed and the rest of it. So well done to the team, because I think that we should be able to be making use of this picture of the end of last year and looking at what's happening in this first quarter to be able to identify some of the opportunities as well as the challenges of COVID. Now, one of the opportunities is obviously there, 4.31, we're talking about the reduction in spending on concessionary fares. Older people have been locked down, they've not been travelling by bus, and presumably that is something which we're seeing in Q1 as well this year. But I just wondered what the process was from an officer perspective to pick up those opportunities, to see if there are trends which are enabling us to spend less and how we can encourage those trends, as well as obviously the trends where we're having to spend more, where we need to be targeting solutions, so such as the young people who are now in private foster care rather than our own foster care. But we know there are families in Derby who unfortunately are being made redundant, and some of those might feel that it's time for them to take up a role as foster carers. So how are we breaking into those opportunities and seeing others that I've clearly not thought of and don't want to talk about in the extent, but the process by which we're doing it?
Like, obviously, we are constantly flexing the budget, looking at options. So, for example, we're going to be investing some additional capacity to look at how we can help children exit care, and that is about, in a sense, looking at how we can meet their needs but also reduce our costs. But just picking up the example that Councillor gave on concessionary fares, yes, there's less people accessing concessionary fares, but on the flip side, if you think about at home school transport and some of the social distancing that we also have an obligation to fund, is going to have increased pressures, because some of the way that people travelled to school previously probably will not be practical under the social distancing rules. So it's almost like for every saving there might be an additional pressure, and this is what myself and my team and the directors are constantly looking at, about what is the opportunity to cut our cloth, to be innovative, but also what are the demand pressures coming down the line. And I do agree with Councillor Kerr, for example, as a number of people are unfortunately let go from their jobs in the city, if we can, as I know Councillor Williams already is doing, making sure, for example, that our fostering offer is made known to those people being released from some of our companies, because it might be then people say, well, I can look at a different route of helping families and helping our children in care if I've lost my main job into one of the major companies in the city. So we are constantly being innovative, but as an accountant, there's almost every time that I get a saving, there's a pressure. And this is for me to report in the Q1 and Q2 and Q3 monitoring how successful we are in a sense balancing those two up. It's the toughest year that I think as a finance director I've had to manage, because normally you know what is driving the pressure. With COVID, you don't know necessarily sometimes what the cost might be, or when a service might be able to be sort of put back into service to provide it to the city. So it is very, very volatile and gives me some sleepless nights, but not total sleepless nights.
Good.
Thank you much, Simon. Simon, let me draw your attention to page 13, 4.631. A52 artwork scheme, £100,000, about putting plaques on bridges. What do those plaques say? This is a bridge. It seems a lot of money in terms of £100,000. You know, why is the city council spending £100,000 to put a plaque on a bridge when money's so tight? Right.
This was a delegated decision during the year to do this. I believe it's going to celebrate the greats of Derby County Football Club. And actually, if you have a look at that bridge, which is quite iconic in its design, but it's also a major thoroughfare across to Pride Park and everything else. It's about creating something that the community of Derby can, in a sense, almost celebrate. It's like the old Wembley Way, isn't it? That's you could have a Wembley Way going to Wembley with nothing on it, and it's just a road to Wembley. This is about an access bridge that many of the football fans will cross. So it was a delegated decision as part of one of our most major highways infrastructure scheme. And I know there's currently, I think it's 100 ideas about what can go there. So you may have a personal view about whether that was required, but I think sometimes in infrastructure projects you have to celebrate some of what it's achieving, as well as, if you want to call it, the bricks and mortar.
Well, it's wrong really for you to be in the firing line over this. I mean, this is reminiscent of the criticism there was about the rings at the spots and other bits of artwork. So I'm sure the Derby public will have their say on this, whether they think it's good value for money. But thank you for sort of trying to defend the indefensible, Simon. But it's not a fair position for you to be put in. I'd like to move on to Councillor Pegg. Councillor Pegg.
Yeah, I'm looking at the page 5. Item 413, the use of revenue reserves, and I noticed that there's the use of reserves to contribute towards the city's share of the fees in relation to the waste treatment plant. Is this a one-off payment, or are we going to be lumbered with this while we've got the white elephant round the neck?
Right. As Councillor Pegg has highlighted, is that members will be aware during the course of last year, I think it was July, the arrangement was made in respect to Sinfin, and that I think the word rectification there is probably not necessarily the right one, but we've been incurring some costs to establish the estimated fair value in respect of the Sinfin, and we also had an audit and accounts risk surgery where that was explored, and a reserve was set aside to meet those immediate costs. So these are our share of the costs incurred to date, shared with Derbyshire County Council, and fully covered by reserves. So it is, if you want to call it, a factual statement of how that expenditure was funded.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think, did you want to come back at all, Paul? Are you okay?
No, I'm okay with that, thanks.
Okay. John, I think John would like to raise a question. John, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Really, it's page 14, I think 4.6.4, the assembly rooms, really. Well, I know this money, this capital variance, is got to be paid, but really, for me, it raises the bigger question. I've probably stated this before, but I'm going to state it again. I knew two of the engineers that worked on that building when the fire took place. I don't know if they were in the building at the time. They actually started to put the infrastructure back in place for the new plant room on the roof and was stopped from doing it. And subsequently, under the Labour administration, it got decided to be knocked down and so on. And then when the Conservatives got in, we were going to refurb it. And I went round the building. I actually went round the whole building 2 years ago. And the original scheme was quite just a top and tail job. And as you stated at the beginning, Martin, that probably would have got the building back up and running. I mean, they'd already spent vast amounts on that building on fire improvement works, and I believe it's well in excess of $500,000. And then it got turned into these visions of grandeur, into this big scheme. And here we are now, it's gone again. And we've just let the people of Derby down. So really, my question is what are we doing going forward to avoid making these mistakes? I've probably said this before, but in the old assembly rooms, if it had been managed the old way, when I was doing electrical work in that building 25 years ago, we had a full team in technical services at Roman House, chartered architects, surveyors, heating engineers, electrical engineers, and so forth. This, I can't imagine something like this happening, but now we've farmed things out to consultants, and then we rely on these expert consultants all the time. It seems to be self-perpetuating for failure, really, and we've let the people of Derby down. I just want to know we've got some reassurance going forward that we're not going to keep falling into these same pitfalls, really. That's all. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Miles, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to see if my video gets going. Yeah, just on the assembly rooms, specifically to do with the insurance money that was received, and I was just wondering when we received that money, what that money was spent on, and how much was left in May 2018 of the insurance money that was paid out.
Simon?
Councillor Patterson, I obviously wasn't here at the time of the fire, though I had been to a concert about a couple of months beforehand. But the insurance money was received and incurred some costs at the time, and also went into our reserves, which form part of the funding package in 2018 when the refurbishment was proposed. If you want a more detailed answer, I can provide to members outside of this meeting the utilisation of the insurance fund that came in and the insurance monies, because I don't have that available at the moment.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. Are there any more comments before we start to wrap this up? Because we've got plenty of other items on the agenda. If not, I'd like to make you've got the printed recommendations that are down that I'm proposing. I don't know if I have a seconder for those at all.
Yeah.
Who was that? Sorry. Who was that? Sorry, the microphone's not working.
Councillor Pegg. Paul Pegg.
Okay, Councillor Pegg is seconding the recommendation. So I'd like to put it to the vote on that. The recommendations are as read, that this is to go to Cabinet tomorrow evening. Can those indicate in favour, please show by...
Councillor Upton.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, could I just ask you to read out the recommendation for the purposes of those watching on the YouTube stream, because obviously the what you've written down in the comments doesn't show on the YouTube stream. So if you could read out the recommendation that you're proposing to the board, and then move to the vote after that.
Yeah, that is, the council must learn from their mismanagement of this matter, and in future listen to and act upon expert professional advice. And 2, apologise for the dither, delay and indecision that has led to many wasted years, no performance venue in the centre of our city, and staggering, quote, abortive costs of £2.468 million.
Councillor Upton, could you just clarify in your first part of the recommendation, mismanagement of this matter, which matter you're referring to, and is there a link to the particular paragraph in the report?
Yes, the 4.640 talking about the abortive costs
in relation to the assembly rooms refurbishment.
Of the refurbishment of the assembly rooms. Okay,
Councillor Evans has indicated he'd like to speak. Councillor Upton.
Yeah, Councillor Kerr, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Evans.
Sorry, John, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, really, I don't want to say much, but I see this as a bit of politicising, really. It was delayed under Labour as well. We do need to drill in and look into it, but I can't really support something that's attacking one party or the other, because I want to move this forward positively, really. And I don't want to use it as a political tool for attacking another party. So I'm sorry about that, but that's really all I've got to say.
I understand, and that's the beauty of democracy, but I think we need to draw a line under things. I think people need to learn and need to hold their hands up, because, as you rightly said, John, you and others were told that it could and it should have been done at a much cheaper cost, and suddenly it goes up from 2 million to 5 million to 10 million to 15 million to 20 million, 25 million, 30 million. Now, if that's not mismanagement, and that's against officer advice as well, and expert advice. Lucy, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I think it needs to be clear as to whether it, in your first point there, refers to the Cabinet, because we're normally recommendations we make to the Cabinet for them to consider tomorrow, not to the Council. But you commented that it is the Council. Now, if we think it's the Council that needs to learn, and I think all councillors need to be mindful of our respect for professional advice, then it needs to be obviously to everybody. And I'm not sure this is the correct way to pass it through. But if we're talking about the cabinet, then it needs to say the cabinet, and I'm not sure must learn. You know, we would like the cabinet to learn from this poor management of the assembly rooms issue.
I'm quite happy, Lucy, if you want to put that as an amendment. If you could type that in for me, I'm quite happy. I'd accept that if you want to amend it.
And to remember, shall I just slightly reword that bit for you? Okay. And I think that that I would certainly like to take the 2 points as separate votes rather than together.
Okay. Do you want to amend that the first part?
I'm doing my best now. I'm not a speedy typist.
Okay. So the cabinet must learn from the mismanagement of this matter and in future listen to and act upon professional advice. Okay.
Councillor Repton, I think whilst Councillor Kerr drafts her amended recommendation, there are two other councillors who've indicated they want to speak, Councillor Hussain and Councillor Patterson.
Sure, yeah. Councillor Hussain, Fareed, and then Miles. Fareed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just respond to Councillor Evans' point? I think it's a good point that we shouldn't try to politicise things, but to be honest, the blunder that is being discussed here has got such a huge magnitude that we can't just ignore it as if nothing's happened. We've spent £2.5 million, or just slightly under £2.5 million, on trying to revive what everybody knew was a dead dog. From the very outset, the officers gave a professional assessment that assembly rooms is not revivable. But the administration in control was fantasizing. They were not on this planet at all. They kept coming back with an idea after idea which needed investigation, and we had to appoint consultant after consultant to see if they could make it work. And in the process, we've not only wasted 2 years, but we've also wasted £2.5 million of Derby Public's money. Whereas any sensible setup, political setup, would have actually taken some advice before they made a manifesto commitment to see whether it was deliverable or doable. You can't really just dream up silly ideas and then come into the council, form an administration and say, put my silly ideas into practice, you officers, and waste all that money. So lesson must be learned that this is not the way to go about running the council, and I think we should agree with the recommendation, and that's for the benefit of everybody who's listening to this debate today, and those who are not here might see it on YouTube and learn a bit from the whole thing.
Thank you very much, Fareed. Lucy, if you, I think you did you possibly mean poor management rather than poorly management?
I did, and I corrected myself afterwards. But
is it possible just to correct that? If you could do that, thank you very much. Whilst I take
the cabinet should learn from the poor management of the assembly room saga and remember the importance of listening to and acting upon expert professional advice.
Yeah, if you could just rejig that and type it, because I think we need that. Alex will probably need that in.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
I think Alex would have done it.
We can capture that. That's fine.
Okay. Right. I'll take Miles, and then I've got Stephen Willoughby. Thank you very much. Miles, and then Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just where it says apologise for the delay and indecision. Is that specific for the cabinet to apologise?
I think it's specific to for those who are involved in making those decisions, Miles.
So with the delay and indecision and so-called wasted years, etc., could we apply that for all cabinets who have been in administration since the assembly rooms had obviously caught fire, and not just specific to one when we're talking about many wasted years?
Well, in fairness, I think we're talking about a decision that was made against officer advice and saying, oh yes, it can be done, all it needs is a lick of paint, and then suddenly we've just gone through it. 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, 25 million, 30 million, and still rising. And now, because that cabinet at that time ignored expert advice, the people of Derby are facing £2.468 million abortive costs for absolutely nothing to show for it, and 2 wasted years. Now, I think it's important, no matter who was in control of making that decision, it's the ones that made that decision just need to say, yeah, we got it wrong. If they do that, we can move on. Okay, thank you very much. I've got Miles, Stephen Willoughby, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I suppose I think that I'm one of those that was sort of just wanted, a performance venue. Reading one of the papers later on about art. Derby is a great cultural centre, and at the time I was persuaded that this way was to get that up and back for as little as cost as possible, much quicker than rebuilding. And certainly loads of people have spoken to me, they fail to see, the public out there, why it hasn't reopened when there was the sort of refurb thing. They just thought, like I think, was it you said at the start, that it just needed like a lick of paint, and then it got into more grandiose ideas, which I was personally always a bit uncomfortable about. I just wanted to see the thing reopened again, and obviously I wasn't aware of the sort of what's come out now of the economic viability of it, and so I was one of those people that was that was, if you like, misled by it. And now, as everybody else has said, I echo the sentiment of other people, other councillors, that 2 years on, we've wasted 2 years, and the city's got to wait even longer now, as we'll see on a later paper, for a performance venue. And I think that that is a bad thing. We failed, as Councillor Evans said, really, we failed the city there, we failed the residents of Derby there. We're sort of thinking that we could refurb it, really, I think.
Thank you very much, Stephen. If there's nobody else who wants to come in, we'll move to the vote. So there's 2 parts of the recommendations. Can you read them through, please, again, Alex?
Chair, if I may do that. I've just written them down here, so if you don't mind,
Stephen.
If we've got 2 parts, then so if I read the first one, and then if you'd like me to, I can go to the vote, and I can go through the members of the committee alphabetically. Okay. But I'll read through first of all then. So first one, the Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that in relation to the refurbishment of the Assembly Rooms, it should learn from the poor management of the Assembly Room saga and remember the importance of listening to and acting upon expert professional advice.
Okay. Those in favour, if you can indicate, please. Those in favour?
It may be easier, Chair, for me just to do a roll call, if you're happy with that.
Stephen, yeah,
so I'll go to each member and ask them to indicate their vote. Councillor Kerr, first of all, please.
I'm for that, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
Abstain, thank you. Councillor Evans.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Hudson.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Pegg.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Testro.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Willoughby.
For.
Thank you. And finally yourself, Chair.
For.
Thank you. So that's for 5 for and 0 against.
Okay, so it's the recommendation 2 now, please. So Stephen, if you can go through that.
Thank you. Yep, here we go. To recommend to Council Cabinet that in relation to the refurbishment of the Assembly Rooms, it apologises for the delay and indecision that has led to many wasted years, no performance venue in the centre of our city, and staggering abortive costs of £2.468 million. Would you like me to do a roll call again, Chair?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Kerr.
I'm going to abstain on that one, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Evans?
Abstain also.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Pegg?
For.
Thank you.
Me out.
Sorry?
You've left me out. I should have followed Hudson.
Sorry, Councillor Hussain. Can I have your vote, please?
For.
Thank you. I apologise. Councillor Testro, have I asked you?
You haven't, but abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Willoughby?
I will. I'll probably abstain.
Thank you. And yourself, Chair?
For.
Thank you. So that's 3 for and 0 against.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that will go to Cabinet tomorrow evening. Thank you very much for that. Thank you to the officers for presenting that report. So that's item 9. We'll now move on to the late item 13A, and that's the new performance venue. Can I ask is it going to be Rachel that takes this, or is it going to be...
It is me, Martin. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, and Rachel, Street Director, Communities in Place. Thank you, Chairman. Okay, this report as a late item brought to you clearly because work has been going on very much to the wire around this particular opportunity. I want to sort of set it in some context, and part of the discussion you just had about the impact of COVID on our society and our economy is, untested yet, but clearly a traumatic impact on our economy. So in that context, and the issues we're facing in our own local economy around the impact of redundancies, etc., at Rolls-Royce and others, and some of that uncertainty. This is about the private sector market bringing forward a very exciting opportunity to create a new performance venue for Derby, something members just reflected very much needed in the city to create vibrancy, to put back that offer of a cultural venue for events for people locally, particularly in the context of the changing nature of our high streets and culture being even more important to create vibrancy in city centres. Its role in terms of stimulating further interest and investment in the overall generation of the city can't be overemphasised. So I really want to make that point really strongly. What it does around building confidence in Derby as a place to invest is a really important point. On its own, as a facility, it brings a gross value added uplift of £11 million a year. That's to the hospitality and the broader supply chain in the economy locally. It brings over 200 jobs into the city and 250,000 visitors into the city, which is really obviously very important. But as I've said, it also signals much needed confidence and is something about bringing private sector interest and belief, if you like, in Derby's economy for somewhere to invest further investment, so really important. It also generates a derelict site and is that catalyst for further investment, as I've said. So in terms of the commercial arrangements for this, it's also about transferring the risk of this to the private sector. So the private sector will build, take all the construction risk and the planning risk of this new facility, and then the operating and managing risk. And clearly, these are people with the expertise in the private sector across the country, bringing their expertise into taking those risks away. So rather than the council holding those risks and some of the issues you just exercise, that risk sits very squarely in the private operator. The arrangement would be the council would agree a forward purchase agreement to buy the arena, but subject to the planning being in place, and planning is incumbent on the operator also being in place. And some of the key building blocks are in place before the council takes that final step into actually purchasing the arena. The report, therefore, simply seeks approval to enter into heads of terms around that arrangement. In terms of the capital, I'll come on to the finance a little bit later on, but it would also bring in an income to the council. So the council would take a lease amount from the operator on a fixed basis for the minimum of 25 years, but also take a variable income from ticket sales over that period too. So there will be an income benefit to the organisation, the council overall, none of those risks. Just a little bit of information, clearly members know this, but I want just to reinforce it, around Beckett Well and the site itself. It's a significant priority for the city's regeneration and has been for a period of time. The council's taken a very strong interventionist approach on this derelict site, working to de-risk it in terms of its ability for investment and to leverage in that private investment. So clearly this opportunity is about achieving some of those goals for that site. There are some land assembly issues still not to be completely confirmed, and that includes the former Pennine Hotel and the Padley Centre. And the private owner of the majority of the site already in Beckett Well will seek to acquire those pieces of land to achieve the overall land assembly. And the council in this report is giving assurance that its compulsory purchase powers would be there as a backstop to be used if necessary to create that whole land, what we need in terms of the land assembly to achieve the arena. Just as a side, we're working very closely with the Padley Centre as part of our quite innovative homeless pathway within Derby Homes and the council and our partners. So it would be about how we provide that service in a way that fits in with our overall approach to rough sleeping in the city. And there'll be further reports on the detail of that, obviously, at a later date. In terms of the Assembly Room site, which you've just obviously discussed, this report seeks to demolish that building, subject obviously to planning permission. And we are working on a number of options for that site, really recognising the importance of the whole of the marketplace area of the city, including the Assembly Room site, the Guildhall, the marketplace itself, as being a critical cultural, vibrant space that the city needs to use and to really maximise the use of. It's a destination. And we are looking as part of the refresh of the master plan about a mini master vision, if you like, for that particular overarching site, to make sure we do everything we can collectively around those buildings on that site to create vibrancy and excitement and stuff that really builds our visitor attraction in the city. There are a number of ideas for the site. I won't go into those in detail at this stage, but they're working with partners, very much working with partners in the cultural sector in the city to understand what is available around some of that opportunity for that site. It needs to be something that brings vibrancy into the city centre and doesn't lose that. And also in terms of the meanwhile use of that site, so after demolition and before formal arrangements for a new provision to be based on that land, meanwhile use, looking at pop-up temporary opportunities, street art, street markets, urban art, things that are actually quite vibrant and exciting about using that open space in a way that isn't just a hole in the ground or a derelict space. It really has a contribution to play into that cultural vibrancy of that part of the city centre. And there's clearly some market analysis going on about how we would understand that, and that will be brought back to future meetings. In terms of some of the impacts of the potential proposal for the arena on Beckett Well, there are obviously some impacts on the velodrome site that the council itself owns and operates. That is dependent on the operator. So there hasn't been an operator so far selected for this site as part of the next phase before planning permission. But if that operator was somebody who wanted to run a panto, there may be some impacts on the income that's takes at the moment from the velodrome, because we will want to compete with that site. Clearly the objective of the operator working with the council is to work complementary with the velodrome and not to be competitive around what events we put on in those two different venues. So it's very much about how we make sure we maximise the use of additional space to bring in additional things and things that are complementary to the city. So there is a potential income loss there we need to understand in the overall picture. Now I will represent in a while that we have colleagues on the call tonight, Simon Riley, who's just spoken very eloquently about a whole range of things within the council, and Emily Feenan from our legal perspective, and also Catherine Woods for Generation, who've been doing all the detailed work on this. So the detailed questions about some of the finances and the legal bits, they can do some of those questions, but very much at a headline level on the financials. The council would be spending just over £45 million plus stamp duty on purchasing the arena. Very headline level, we have nearly £11 million in the capital pot allocation for the assembly rooms, so that will obviously go towards that cost. And the additional £35 million gap would be achieved through prudential borrowing. We're also exploring external funding opportunities, and we're raising those questions with a variety of people, including the government, as part of the post-COVID requirement for additional funding and support. But without that external funding, that 35 million will be potential borrowing from the council. As I've said, the income that would come to offset that borrowing cost comes from the fixed rental from the operator to the council, and we're talking about 25-year minimum period, but also a variable income coming from ticket sales to be negotiated. We feel that a cautious estimate of around £500,000 a year would be a reasonable amount of income to expect, and that could be higher. So that offsets the borrowing impact of the borrowing of 35 million. And we already have in the medium-term financial plan nearly £350,000 as a revenue funding to operate a performance venue. Over and above that, of course, this brings into the city additional council tax take over the Beckett Well site as a whole, the residential development on the Beckett Well site, and plus business rates into the council. Both of those things are onto the bottom line of the council's income. So nothing of the broader impact into the community and the economy and that confidence that I mentioned at the beginning. So this report really sets the ball rolling on what is an ambitious and quite exciting prospect for the city. I think it really seals a confidence in the city, and I would say, bearing in mind the economic position we're all in the COVID situation in this country, to have private market interest at this level is a really, really strong endorsement of the city of Derby and how people feel about it, which is really positive. It de-risks the delivery of a really difficult project away from the council to the private sector. I think also quite important for the council, bearing in mind your previous conversation, and has clear overarching benefits to the city around performance venue and vibrant CSD centre. So as I said, Catherine Williams, Simon Riley and Emma Phelan are all on the call to take in the more detailed questions. They have all been involved in what's been quite a large bit of teamwork to achieve, and also Claire Davenport, also from the cultural perspective. So officers are here to take these questions, but happy to take any other than those myself. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much, Rachel. It is a shame that we haven't got elected members here, because I think in some respects officers are in the line of fire, and that seems a little bit unfair, but that's the way that it actually works. So we have to deal with what we've actually got. Now, a couple of questions I'm going to bring in after I've spoken, Fareed, Richard, and then Stephen, and then Lucy, and then John Evans. But what consideration was given to the assembly? What serious consideration, or otherwise, was given to the assembly room site? Because I have real concerns about the dangers of demolition of the assembly rooms, because I've been around long enough to remember in the 1990s when a hotel was planned where Quad is now, and we had a hole in the ground which made Derby twin with Beirut for about 5 years. It was a bomb site that was full of water and there was dereliction. So we're concerned that serious consideration hasn't been given to having the performance venue on the Assembly Rooms Marketplace site. And then moving on from that, if we do go to Beckett Well, the real concerns are, without any concrete plans, no pun intended, that we could end up being twin with Beirut again and have a mess left there after demolition. So I don't know if I'll come back on that, Rachel, before I take Fareed, Richard, Stephen, Lucy and John, and then Rob Cooper.
So, I mean, there's a lot of questions in there. I won't answer all of them. Some of them are outside of my sort of pay grade, really. But in terms of the Beckett Well site and why that site, not the assembly room site, very simply, this is about land owned by the private sector already. It is a site that is much easier to access, and the model that they are using for the arena is a national model. So these arenas of this sort of 3,500 size is a model being used in a variety of cities of our equivalent size across the country. It's a gap in the market, if you like. It works really effectively. Some of the modelling of this around the Hull Arena, the bonus arena in Hull, and the site, it fits the site really well. It is a really, really good fit for that site. It allows access at the back. It allows some of the technical requirements of a venue of that sort to operate much more effectively on that site. But fundamentally, of course, you know, the owner of that land own that land, and therefore they've brought forward that potential opportunity. In terms of the longer term, medium and longer term visions for the assembly room site, a clear commitment to finding things that are culturally additional of use of that site. So there would not be a clear commitment not to create a hole in the ground. So if the council would demolish the site, there would be meanwhile uses on that site of vibrancy. Now we are already working as part of the COVID recovery on how we make better use of the marketplace to create space for people to come together, to interact, to do a number of different things, have cultural experiences, but also use that in a more proactive, active way than we do at the moment. And the Assembly Room site will play a part in that. So we're working with cultural partners on a cultural programme of events and places to come to and see things in the whole of that marketplace space, which could also encompass, when it was demolished, the Assembly Room site itself. In the longer term, we have some quite interesting and exciting opportunities being explored with partners about how we would actually gain, or we would achieve more cultural activity on that site. Now, I can't go into detail about that in the public domain. There still are discussions that are taking place in early stages, but there are strong indications that we may be able to achieve something additional on that that would add to that vibrant mix of cultural opportunity.
Thank you, Rachel. I think there's certainly plenty of questions we've got which are not fair to fire at you or officers, Rachel, but certainly elected members that we need answers for. But Richard, Fareed, Stephen, Lucy, John, Rob, Miles. So starting with Richard, then Fareed. Richard.
Right, thank you, Chair. I'll try and split this down into several sections. Firstly, the information I'm looking at here, when is this research done from? I'm going to sound like a broken record. Is it post-March 2020 or is it pre-March 2020? That's the first bit, because if we want to go back to the conversation we've just had, we're going to need contemporary information which informs our decision making.
Can I just confirm then that information is post-COVID? So we have been back and checked all of these figures with the organisations involved post the COVID epidemic, absolutely.
Right, thank you for that, Rachel. Now, if I go to 4.12, the facility will be operated by a private operator on a commercial basis. There's several companies out there which probably would bid for that tender, AEG, O2, SMG, etc. But recently, all of their share prices have completely collapsed. Are we confident they would want to increase their portfolio rather than actually reduce it over the next few years?
Well, so our conversations with the owner, obviously, securities of this site, and they have been discussing options with operators in the market. There is still really strong interest, but clearly, as I said, the council would not purchase the arena until the operator was on side and in a contract. And we obviously had got planning permission. So we are not taking over the risk around that risk at this stage.
Right, thank you, Rachel. I've got a further question, but I'll wait until we're on the pink paper for that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, if I could just remind members, we just need to be careful in terms of the questions that we ask, because there are confidential information in there. Fareed, over to you.
Chair, I do welcome various aspects of this report. Being a ward member for this area, I've been a councillor for 26, 27 years, and actually Beckettwell was derelict when I first got elected. So it's been derelict for good 30, 40 years. I can't even remember how long. So I welcome this opportunity to rehabilitate this area and make it vibrant. And hopefully deal with the eyesore that we've been seeing for such a long time. But my question is, an equally compelling case was actually made by our officers and all the professionals who were involved in choosing a site. And they chose Assembly Room as the most appropriate or effective place for the entertainment venue, performance venue. Now, I think the comparison that's been done has been done against Assembly Rooms as it is, refurbishment, and the performance venue. Whereas actually the comparison that I would have liked to have seen is between the two sites. Both sides have got strengths, and maybe one might come out stronger, and this perhaps might be the case that the Beckettwell site might have emerged as a stronger contender for being the appropriate site. However, that comparison and all that work that was previously done has been thrown in the bin. There is no mention in terms of the strength of the case if we chose assembly room site as the appropriate site for Ms. Lanier. That information appears to be missing from the report, and I would have liked to seen it and make a comparison between the two and weigh up the benefits and weaknesses of both sides, and then come to a considered view. And I'd like the council still to actually do that, if that's possible. Thank you.
Okay, if I try and answer that, if my colleague wants to come in and answer some more on that basis. So fundamentally, this is not something the council has actively sought. It is about an owner of a private sector, an owned site. So Beckett Road is a derelict site, and we obviously wanted to get private investment into that site. A operator, a developer has bought that site, and they've gone away and done this work and presented the opportunity to us. So it's very much been about them presenting an opportunity as opposed to taking a completely purist view of where would you put a performance venue in the city. If that makes sense. There's an opportunity that's been brought to us that we wouldn't be able to particularly achieve as a council trying to do it ourselves. It's very much about the private sector bringing an opportunity. And that's the opportunity that you are now presented with. And similar to the comments that Mr. Riley made, I wasn't here in any of those experiences in that period of time it's been talked about, but I can't really comment on decisions that were taken at that time. So, any other comments from other my colleagues on any of that?
So what we have the private sector may prefer that site, but what about the people of Derby? What about the needs of Derby? Where they seem to have got lost in this equation, Rachel.
I think I would want to make a point, Councillor Repton, that this is an executive scrutiny of a decision. It's not a political debate that you can involve officers in. We're not able to take by some of these. It's quite
I understand it, and it's a shame why we haven't got an elected member here. Maybe in future we will invite one. But okay, moving on from that, let's move on to Stephen, and then Lucy, John, Rob, Miles. Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I echo your sentiments because I've certainly got a number of questions that are probably, I'm going to have statements I would have made that I will hold fire on because it would be unfair on the officers for me to ask them, certainly, Chair. So I would echo that concern. So I'm just going to hold back on what I was going to say. But my first concern or question really is on page 2, paragraph 210, about the fate of the Padley Centre. Now they're one of the vital cogs in helping the homeless in this city, along with of course some other charities and obviously the important night shelter over the winter months, for example, the churches put on, and also continuously helping the homeless over these last continually through the year. And they do a very good, key, important work, and of course we've seen that with all this engagement during the COVID. So I want to know what actively is being done to actually find an alternative accommodation for them, because so they can carry on with their work and to actively help them develop maybe something even better than what they've got now. Or was it just going to this private one? Because I'm very concerned about things in that paragraph around, compulsory purchase orders. If the Padley Centre themselves haven't been able to find alternative accommodation, so I'd like to first of all ask about what help is being given for the Padley Centre.
Okay, so we
can I just come in my next question? Is that all right, or should I answer all the questions you mind?
Yeah, okay, Stephen. Yeah. What I'm wondering, Rachel, would it be an idea because we've got 1, 2, 3, we've got 4 people. If we make a note of their questions, and I'll let you answer them all. Yes. Or do you prefer individually? Which would you prefer, Rachel?
Do them all. That's good. Yeah.
Okay. So Padley first of all. Stephen, do you want to see the second one?
This one is page 8. Paragraph 4.29. Now, about the demolition of the Assembly Rooms car park. Now, I'll be honest, I won't personally mourn the loss of that car park. I think it's horrible, awful, pokey, small car park, very difficult to park in. But so I won't bemoan that obviously. But what is being done to house all the people that park there? Because pre-COVID, of course, admittedly, but when I used to come there early mid-afternoon or even mid-morning to a council meeting, I used to have lots of difficulty. Take me some time to find a space in there. So it is a well-used car park. So what is actually being done to house the people that are actually going to to park in there, really? And
okay.
my I think my final one, there was around the demolition. I think you've answered that one. I think it was those two questions that I had.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Okay, Rachel's made a note and she'll come back to those. Lucy, over to you then. John, Rob and Miles. Lucy.
Thank you. Yes, I've got several points here. Can I start with looking at the officer recommendation, which are pretty all-encompassing. To take all necessary actions to finalise his paragraph 2.1, to take all necessary actions to finalise and enter into all necessary contractual arrangements to acquire a new performance arena. That sounds to me as if there's nothing there that's going to come back to members between now and opening day. And I don't think that's the level of responsibility that we should be delegating, and I would hope that Cabinet wouldn't be delegating that absolute handover of responsibility to officers without any more democratic oversight between now and 2024 or whatever the expected date was. So really a comment on that and why it's being written in those terms.
That's great. Just go through those then, Lucy.
Second point is in terms of the commercial partner, whom we don't yet know who it is, but it's been sold as a way to reduce all risk. Well, what happens if that commercial partner goes into liquidation, and what are we then left with, and how are we, particularly in a post-COVID environment, and we don't know how many venues are going to be able to continue to be operating, and therefore how many shows there are going to be touring over the next few years if COVID continues to be an issue in the medium to long term.
Okay.
It's a bit of discussion on this forward funding agreement, which is sold very happily here as a way of de-risking everything, and we're getting a lot from the private sector. But the bottom line is that we've got 46 million pounds that will be transferred from ourselves to the private sector at some point in the future once everything's been agreed, which sounds like a large sum of money, and we need to be very sure that it's right. So it's that de-risking. It's not quite a PFI agreement, which I think have been rejected as a form of funding, but it's still doing a similar thing in that we are putting together getting the capital. We're paying the capital up front, we're de-risking the construction, and we're then trying to get the money back through a third-party operator. Okay. There's quite a large sum that's put aside for project management costs. I think it's about £500,000, and if we aren't doing that project management because it's all being done by the private sector, I'd like a little more information about what we're spending £500,000 on.
Okay, we'll come
so and finally we entered into a PFI agreement about the waste plant, and we're now going through very difficult negotiations as to what our future liabilities might be for that. And I just want to be sure that we, entering into this agreement, we couldn't at some point in the future, because our major partner has gone into liquidation or something else, we couldn't end up with, again, future liabilities and values of things being negotiated and ending up with more costs that we haven't bargained for at this stage.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I'm sure...
Oh, final thing. It's a little thing, Chair.
Okay,
can we stop using arena to refer to this? Because in Derby, the arena is that place in Pride Park. We need to refer to this not as Beckettwell Arena, which won't mean anything to anybody, but some other word than arena. I don't know what it is, but performance venue is fine. Let's not call it arena.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, moving on to John Robert Miles, and then we'll try and wrap it up. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Rachel. I'll be quite quick. 2.5 to approve prudential borrowing. This might be my ignorance in financial terms, but I don't really understand what prudential borrowing is and whether it's the company. And then also, is the interest rate fixed, variable, capped? Because if interest rates do in the future, which could be likely in a few years to come, we could end up paying, double the money back. So how's that been factored in? And then the second question really was the Beckettwell development. It's not really near the bus station or the train station. So what measures are being put in place to cater for the 3,500 people that may attend the venue? Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, that's really good. That's a model of being succinct. I think we're all to follow. Robin Miles.
Thank you, Chair. The question I'd like to ask is point 4.6. It talks about in January 2020 the costs were in excess of £30 million. And I just want to try and get a timeline in my mind. At what point? It says January 2020 that the assembly rooms was deemed too expensive to refurbish. And what time did the private company have an expression of interest in the new venue and the new 3,500 performance venue? I just want to see, how the timelines marry up. And really, there's been a lot of really good questions. And there's been a lot of really good points been made so far about the financial side of it. I'd just like to go more in, and also the transport links. I'd like to go into the more stuff. I think it was the point that Councillor Willoughby made earlier, 4.29. I must admit, I do love history, and I was just wondering. It says here that the ceiling, the Jacobean ceiling, is not listed in the assembly rooms. Where I'd just like some advice or assurances that the council will look to maybe see if that can be listed, just that ceiling, and would the museum trust would be able to work with the council to see if they can locate a place for it to reside. Thank you.
Been responding, I think. Right, Miles, last of all.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to actually do have a question. I just wanted to reflect on the comment that you actually just made at the start of this item, comparing a construction hole in Derby to a bomb site in Beirut, and just wanted to sort of say that I think that's quite a crass comment to make, inconsiderate, and quite an uneducated comment from a elected member and chair of a council committee. I was quite disappointed to hear that.
What's your question, Mike? What's your question, please?
No question. I was just making that point. Thanks, Chair.
Well, if we could cut out the abuse, then we'll get on with it. Right. Okay.
I don't think that was abuse, Chair. I think that's Councillor Patterson making his views.
Robert, if you can please, he's going to follow protocol. I'll take the people are down. So let's try and follow protocol. Right, Rachel, please.
Okay, I'll do my best, Chairman. So the first question was about the Padley Centre, Councillor Willoughby, and we're working very closely with the Padley Centre. So I've met personally with the trustees and the chair of the trustees board to work out how best we can support the relocation of the facility to maintain the great work they do already in our homeless pathway, and hopefully to enhance that. There's a real opportunity to do something different in terms of how they might operate within that pathway. So they're very much an active partner working with the council and from our housing perspective about how we could find a way of relocating them to maintain their excellent work. In terms of the question about the car park and the assembly rooms, as the report sort of explains, the interconnectedness of the building and the construction of the assembly rooms with the car park make it almost impossible or totally uneconomic to try and knock down one without the other. So they would need to remove the car park at the same time. Clearly, we're not going to be able to do that in a very sort of quick order. It's going to take us some time, and we're looking at how we could provide alternative provision for that parking, whether on that site after demolition, and we would probably hope there will be some dispersal of that parking into other car parks in the centre. We need to understand that better, but of course there would be a potential impact on losing that car park provision. I understand that. In terms of the question about the recommendations being all-encompassing, can I ask Emily to answer that question? Probably better than I could attempt to.
Emily?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Rachel. I'm switching on my video. Apologies. Yes, thank you, Councillor Kerr. The report explains that the idea is that we would negotiate agreements with the with SJS and the operator within the financial parameters that are broadly set out within this agreement, within this report. Apologies. Therefore, as long as those agreements fall within that broad context set out within this these reports, then this delegation would allow officers to pursue the deal along those lines without the need to come back. It's felt that that is appropriate given the detail that's already set out in this report, and also just recognising that partly from a procurement perspective, this isn't a transaction which is allowing the council to spec exactly what it wants within this. This is an opportunity, a commercial opportunity that's being presented for a return, and that is what the council is looking to achieve here, rather than saying we want it to have this type of interior or that type of interior. It's a package which is being presented for the council to take if it meets those parameters which are set out in this report.
Thank you very much, Emily. Back to Rachel with regard to the questions.
The next question was about the financial risk. I wonder if Emily wants to take that one as well, Emily.
Yeah, unfortunately, when Councillor Kerr, when you were saying that question, I had some interference, so I didn't hear all of it. Could you repeat your second question for me again, please?
Well, this was looking at the risk of the commercial partner. If the commercial partner whom we have the agreement with were to go into liquidation, so they might pay us for the first year, but then they fail for whatever reason. What's the result? You know, there is a risk there that I don't know how that is being managed.
Yes.
And what protection is there for us about that?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Obviously, that's part of the negotiation and the structure of the documents to be agreed. But the way the documents would be set up, we anticipate, is that there would be provisions in the agreement which would allow, in the event of insolvency, for example, for the asset to revert into the council and the council to have the opportunity to step into the arrangements, to allow a new operator to be procured, and for the continued operation of the venue going forward. We'd obviously also be looking at parent company guarantee arrangements for the operator and performance bonds to be put in place.
Thank you very much, Emily. Back to Rachel.
Okay. Next question was about the project management costs, and there's more information on this in the pink papers, but I think Catherine will give you a very sort of a brief overview of what those would include.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just switching my video on now. Good evening, everyone. Yes, in terms of the project management costs, there is a detailed breakdown in the pink papers that Rachel referred to. This covers a broad range of professional advice, legal advice, and other expert advice that we would need in pulling together the various transactions that have been described in the report, and making sure that the council's interests are fully represented. So given we're still, I think, in the public meeting, I won't go into the detail of the breakdown, but just to refer Cabinet members to the pink paper for more detail on those project management costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Back to you, Rachel.
The next question was about the word arena. And obviously the existing velodrome is called an arena in Derby. There would need to be more work around that. Part of the operator proposal includes the word arena being quite an important attraction, if you like, in terms of bringing people in to use it. So there may need to be some remodelling of what word we would use for this. I think the arena will be the appropriate word. But as we said in the report, there will need to be some rethinking about how the velodrome works in the future, and that arena may have a different operating model that may actually require a different name. But that is not to be decided now, but take on the point on board. The next question about prudential borrowing, I think Simon's probably best placed to answer that question, and the interest rate.
So thank you. And in response to Councillor Evans, we would do the potential borrowing at a fixed rate at that. Currently, this is forecast at 2.72%. We hope by the time that we have to borrow, that Public Works Loan Board interest rates may have reduced, or that we may have secured external funding to mitigate some of our potential borrowing. So that's what we have here is, if you want to call it, the current parameter, that we will only borrow at the appropriate time, and if the interest rates have changed significantly, then obviously we'd be reporting that back.
Thank you, Simon.
Was adding to that we would borrow it from the government. It's not borrowing from the Prudential.
Yes, it is from the government. Public Works Loan Board is an executive body of the HM Treasury.
Okay, two more questions, Rachel, about the geographical location away from the bus station.
That's the Repton, but yeah, okay. Second one was Beckett near the train and the bus station. So yes, recognise they're not that as close as perhaps the other site, what we discussed before, is. Operator interest has not raised that as being a concern, so they are not concerned that not being absolutely right next door to both of those venues is going to be a problem for them. And clearly we have got all the Transforming Cities funding, where we're looking at a different mass transit system across the city into the medium term, and we can always work with operators to make sure there's additional public transport offers that can bring people into the heart if it needs to be nearer to the venue. In terms of the interest of the private sector in bringing forward this option to the council and the timelines around the assembly rooms cost, they're completely separate things. I mean, clearly the information about assembly rooms was a private matter from the council to be understanding, and the private sector interest has been building for a period of time, and clearly St James's Securities purchased the land at Becketwell with an attempt to bring forward investment and to bring forward options, but that was happening alongside, and that came to the council, as in the report has said, back in the early part of this year. But there were two unconnected debates within the council. I can be really clear about that. The issue about Jacobean ceiling is not listed, but there is clear commitment to protect it. So absolutely, the intention would be to demolish, to maintain it, to remove it first, and absolutely the Museums Trust are the best people to look after and conserve that for the city's future. I think that's
right. Thank you very much, Rachel. Now, we've spent over an hour on this item, rightly so. It's an important one, but we have got, I think, 6 or 7 other items, and we've got a late item as well. Now, I am tempted to move on. We've got a recommendation from Councillor Willoughby. It is as printed. It's in. There's the first part and the second part. Now, where's Stephen? Stephen, do you want to? Is there a seconder for that? Lucy?
Chair, I'd say I think it'd be helpful for the public to have them read out.
Okay, Stephen, do you want to read out the recommendations, please?
Chair, I've got these ready here. Give me a moment. Okay, so the first one, to recommend to Council Cabinet that this proposal for a new performance venue is only carried forward once alternative accommodation has been found for the Padley Centre, recognising the key work conducted to support the homeless population in the city, and if this alternative accommodation cannot be found, that the private operator is offered the current assembly rooms site. Do you want me to go to a vote on that, member by member, Chair?
Yes, I think Chair, so. Is this, Lucy?
May I suggest a few extra words at the end there to say, or appropriate accommodation is built into the Becketwell development.
Is that acceptable to you?
So that would be appropriate accommodation for the Padley Centre is built into the Becketwell development.
Does anybody else want to amend it as well? It's happy, it's just a joint collective effort of the committee.
Okay, are you happy with that, Alex and Stephen, that we incorporate just those few words rather than somebody rewrite it all again, because otherwise we'll be here all night?
Chair, if Councillor Kerr can just confirm that added wording at the end, please.
Can you confirm that, please, Lucy?
Do you want me to type that in or just repeat it again?
Just whichever's easy for you, please.
So I say all appropriate accommodation for the Padley Centre is built into the Becketwell development.
Yeah, to add that to the first one.
On the end, yeah.
Can we vote on that, Stephen? Or?
Yep, I shall go through the members now, Chair.
Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
For that one.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Evans?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain?
Sorry. 4.
So, 4. Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Pegg?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Testro?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Willoughby?
So Michael, 4.
Thank you. And finally, yourself, Chair?
4.
Thank you. So that's unanimous in favour.
Right. Now we've got the second part. Would it help, Stephen? Can we do this? Can we say if anyone's not in favour, or do you need to go through and get an affirmative
Whichever,
yes?
if anyone's not in favour, whichever you think is easier. Yep.
Right, okay. Right, we've got the second recommendation. Can Stephen take it? So, is anybody against that second recommendation?
We still need to read it out.
Can I speak? Can I just speak briefly?
Who's
that's
this?
okay. It's John Evans.
Yeah, go on, John.
Thank you. At the very end, it says assembly rooms car park has been identified. Could that be probably improved to say has been secured, is available, or something like that? Because we can identify something and then go ahead, but actually, it doesn't mean it's actually physically available. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, John. Yeah. If you want to just, I don't know, tell them the rewording, that would read it out. That was fine by me, so I proposed it. Yeah.
Okay. Can you? Do you want to read it out as amended, Stephen, or do you want to read it out as amended, John? Turn your mic on, John.
Okay, I don't mind, Martin. Do you want me to read it out and
yes,
just
please.
amend the very last few words?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll read it out then. Second, that the proposed demolition. Sorry, I'll start again. That the proposal to demolish the current assembly rooms is only carried forward once an alternative car parking provision for those that currently use the assembly rooms has been secured.
Are you happy with that, Stephen?
Me, yes. Absolutely fine. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so you'll second that. Now, Stephen Mason, can we ask members to indicate if they're not happy with that? Otherwise, we will take it that they're all in favour.
Hi,
Stephen?
Chair.
Yeah. Can you? So I'm asking members now to indicate if they're not in favour of that. Otherwise, we'll assume that they are. Okay, I take that as an affirmative. They're supportive of it. Last chance if anybody wishes to speak against it. No, we're in favour of it. Okay. Is that all right for you, Stephen?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, we're moving on now. Thank you very much. That's been a long debate, useful debate. Lucy, there will be opportunity. Remember, no, well, wait a second, please, Lucy. We are going to go into the private section about this as well. But we haven't discussed this now for an hour and a quarter. Go on.
Yeah, I've just sent through another recommendation that Cabinet consider very carefully the extent of the delegation that they are giving to officers and whether there is sufficient democratic oversight by councillors.
I think that's important, Lucy. Thank you for raising that. Do you have a seconder for that?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. That's Fareed seconded it. In terms of, is there? Can anybody? Can you indicate if you're against that motion, please? Any of the councillors that are on? I'll give the second opportunity for any councillors that are against that motion or wish to abstain. Any councillors who are against that motion or wish to abstain? Third and final time. Okay, I take that, and I think everybody does, as affirmative. Are you okay with that, Stephen Mason?
I've got that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, that's item 9 done. We will come back to the private section. Thank you very much, officers, for that. Moving on to item 8. Who will be talking to this? Is Steve Kaplan? Stephen Kaplan?
Good evening, Chair. Yes, I think I shall be introducing this one. Sorry, I just had my speaker monitored. This paper sets out the Council's Property Improvement Capital Works Programme for the current year. It's an annual paper, I believe, that the council traditionally brings to the members to set out clearly how they intend to spend against the already approved budget, which is why the papers tie up with the figures previously reported to the council. The bulk of the figure, of course, is the new Moorways pool. The items that my department specifically oversee are the planned maintenance and capital works, which we've identified on the annex number 2. And the second annex is the budget paper, which it all ties back to. The recommendations are obviously to spend against that approved budget and to vary within the capital approved terms with the agreement of the cabinet member to vary based on situations that change throughout the year on those individual properties. If I can turn specifically to the Appendix 2 and just talk through some of the key items which the members will no doubt have looked at. The first significant item is the new Derby Arena floor, which has been used considerably in excess of its original design specification. It's used far more for entertainment and for shows and so forth beyond its design expectation, and that's why the floor, this is the central floor, to be absolutely clear. This is not the cycling track, which requires substantial redesign and refurbishment and a new floor basically. The second significant item is the leisure centre, and this is very much depends on the future of the leisure centre itself. So we've identified the works that would need to be spent. However, we have a programme that would ensure that it can be kept operational until such time as Moorways comes online. But we've covered the capital work that is currently represented in there. Our commitment to the Padley Centre, I think, is also shown within actually this paper, where we have an item of expenditure shown on one of their other buildings. This isn't the one in the Beckettwell area. Obviously, we wouldn't be spending money on a property that doesn't have a permanent life expectancy. The other significant item collectively is around heating systems. It isn't just the boilers, it is end-of-life heating systems, so that also includes pipe work, removing asbestos, building management systems, pumps, actuators and such like. And we are conscious that we should be trying to reduce our carbon footprint and so forth wherever possible. So we do look at alternative supplies and means of heating, and all replacement boilers will be at a minimum 93% efficient compared to the current ones, which are, as I say, are basically at end of life. So the other items are either carried over from previous years, some window works and items like that, which is why we show a couple of columns with zero expenditure, because it's already been dealt with. But otherwise, this is spending entirely in line with the council's approved budget, which is why the figures tie up. Happy to try to take some questions if it helps members. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Steve. Any questions at all?
Me, please, Chair.
Lucy, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the explanation about the Padley Centre, and I appreciate also the emphasis on being efficient in heating systems. I still think we do need to look further at that, and it's not just having an efficient boiler system, it's actually an efficient building that we need to be looking to, so that we can do away with all the heating altogether in future years. And it's really how much there is a balance being taken to reducing the size of heating systems by investing some of that money into insulation of buildings, or more active ways of gathering energy with PVs on roofs and air-sourced heat pumps or ground-sourced or whatever, wherever possible. Because our climate change aspirations are obviously pushing us as far as we can in that direction. My third point was the fire risk assessments, which seemed to have been removed in the appendix, and I just wondered why we're removing action which was required as fire risk assessments. And finally, there's referenced a number of points to separate cabinet papers, and I just wondered whether these are ones that have already happened or will be coming forward.
What I'm going to ask Steve to do is make a note of each question and then come back in summary to answer each one. I think that's probably the most efficient way. So I'm going to take Stephen and then Paul Pegg and see if there's any more. Stephen, Willoughby, and then Paul Pegg. Thank you.
Chair. Just a quick question, couple of two quick questions. Paragraph 4.5 on page 4. What's the reason for no longer needing the funding on the Roe Farm Community Centre boiler replacement? So that's the first question. And then paragraph 4.9 on page 5. You've obviously mentioned this in your speech about it, but I'm just wondering, are we looking into why the floor, so I mean, I think it was only open sort of 2014, 2015, the arena.
Yeah.
Why is it, when it's so new, that the floor has already given way? Are we going to look at, is there some sort of investigation that's been carried out to look into that? Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, Paul Pegg.
Yeah, mine was basically on Stephen's last question, was to do with the flooring at the sports arena. It was 2014-15 when we opened that building. It's 5 years old. Sure, there's got to be some form of warranty on the flooring of that capacity to not have, for us not have to pay. That, I'm sure that must come under some sort of, say, warranty with the developers, the builders.
Thank you, Paul. I'll bring Steve in to answer those questions before we move on, because sadly I omitted to not take Claire's late item, which I will take next. Over to you, Steve. Can you go through each question? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've captured those. I apologise if I fail to write notes down quick enough. I'm sure members will pick up on that. So the heating systems, yes, we do look constantly at alternative methods. I've challenged that myself, and the councillors will be aware that the Chief Executive is taking a lead on a climate change agenda, directly overseeing how we can reduce our carbon footprint and achieve our goals of becoming carbon neutral. So that it will be very much led by property, and I've literally had an invite today to join that group, which I think meets next week, together with my head of estates, to see how our physical portfolio can contribute to that reduction of the climate impact and use of alternative methods of heating. So it is very much factored in. The fire risk assessments, I think, are now dealt with under consultancy fees and general costs rather than capital programme. The cabinet papers, I think, simply refers to items where, for instance, the Moorways pool was obviously dealt with under a separate capital approval, and things that may involve other capital work are dealt with. So, for instance, the assembly rooms and so forth. That's why there's a cross-reference to other cabinet papers that take approval. The removal on 4.5 of the farm, I believe that's because it's an underspend. So on the outturn slippage, we no longer needed to spend all the money, and therefore that will be recycled, I think, into the programme. We tendered a lot of boiler work, I think, in previous years, and we were successful in getting those at lower budget figures than we'd anticipated. So I think that's the answer there. And on the arena floor, I also have challenged this one, and my understanding is that the design specification at the time was not envisaged to be using it as a mainstay entertainment venue, and the council has, I believe, benefited by additional revenue sources, but the impact that it has sustained in changing and resetting has meant the substruts underneath the floor are failing, and I don't believe they're covered under a 5-year warranty. This sort of high impact area is usually only covered for about a 1 or 2 year life of property. I mean, residential property, you get a house buyer's report and you'll get 10-year warranty on the main structure, but not necessarily on high impact areas. And obviously I wasn't around at the time of the procurement of the building, so I don't know the exact design specification, but I have challenged that myself. This, I'm told, will give it the longer life and more sustainable future, as long as it's operated in accordance with the design specifications.
Thank you.
I think those are the questions, Chair.
Yeah, before we move on from this item to Claire's item, Lisa's made a note. Could you, Steve, talk to Andy Hills about giving a briefing to the climate change champions on the work you are doing on making buildings super efficient? If you could take that away, please, Steve.
I can confirm, Chair, that Andy Hills is the one that sent me the invite to the climate group. So absolutely, yes, I will be having conversations, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the late item from Claire Davenport, Silk Mill Museums and Making. Claire, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Councillor Repton. I bring to you a report today that's focusing on the Silk Mill Museum of Making. Many of you will know that the Museums Trust was awarded National Lottery Heritage Fund grants in 2017, and this was the largest grant of its kind to come to the city, and a great achievement and testament to the confidence in our city for developing a key cultural asset. It was awarded to develop the Museum of Making at the Derby Silk Mill, and again, many people will know that's on the site of the world's first factory. It's a very important part of our heritage in our city. With the funding from a number of key partners, the total budget for the project was around circa 17 million, and it showcased Derby's 300-year history of making and celebrating the area's rich history of innovation. In March 2020, before the COVID-19 lockdown, that's referred to previously in the Executive Scrutiny Committee, having a number of impacts on a number of things. But the project up to that point was within budget and it was on programme. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, however, the projected opening of the new museum has now been moved from September 2020 to spring 2021. And this has understandably resulted in there being an increase to the financial amount for capital needed by the Museums Trust to complete the project. As a result, then the Museums Trust looked at whether COVID-19 was covered in the construction contract, and I can confirm that it's classed as force majeure, so it's not covered by the contract arrangements. So therefore, the project stops before being completed unless the Museums Trust secures external funding. The Museums Trust has therefore approached external funders, including the Council. Their request is for two main elements that are covered in this report. They'd like a loan of up to 914,000 to assist with cash flow, and they'd like a capital contribution of 364,000 to support increased project costs. Now, the purpose of the Cabinet report is to seek approval to support both these requests. The loan would be proposed to be offered at an interest rate of 3.02%, and this does allow for some commerciality. And this is being proposed to be paid back within 12 months from the retention money of the project funding. So the money's in the project. It's been funded by two key external funding organisations, and they have a 10% retention on their funding. So once that retention money is released, then that's the money that pays back the loan, and therefore the temporary funds would be from the Council from unapplied capital receipts. The capital contribution that I referred to earlier is to the maximum value of 364,000, and this is to be funded from the existing capital contingency reserve and therefore has no impact on other existing schemes. The forecasted total to complete the construction of the project is around 1.4 million. So that's a forecast from sort of earlier this year through to February 2021. And because it's a forecast, we won't know the reality of that entirely till nearer the time, but there's been some robust figures arriving at that figure. The Council would like to demonstrate commitment to the Silk Mill Museum of Making project, to help secure additional external funding to support the completion of the construction work. Other external funding is likely to be contingent on the council showing a commitment to the project by committing its own funding, and the report therefore recommends to Cabinet that we do so. It's very important to complete the project, to utilise a unique and valuable council asset in the city, as well as help contribute towards a future vision for culture, which is an instrumental building block, as many of you will know, for the recovery of the city post-COVID-19 and the future economic growth of our city. So not completing the project makes it harder to attract future investment in the city as well. So that's the basis of the report, and hopefully that explains the key points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Claire, for that. Stephen, you've got a question.
Yeah, it's more about the process for bringing this paper, Chair, if you don't mind, because I noticed that an email was sent out at 1:11 informing us about this late item. I picked it up after 4 o'clock, an hour and a half before this meeting. Now, it's because, you know, I may be working from home at the moment, but I am still doing, you know, a full working day, and, you know, hopefully my people will think I'm still working, you know, to full strength. So I'm a bit concerned about why this was deemed so urgent that it should only come in on the afternoon, you know, of this scrutiny committee, and really is even telling us at 1:11 enough time for us to look through this. Bearing in mind we might always pick up our email straight away, as is my case. Is that really enough time to give this, you know, paper sufficient scrutiny, Chair? And I just wondered, is there any sort of, you know, criteria we could look at for submitting papers late, or if there could be a final sort of deadline whereby things aren't submitted, because I don't think it's really given us a chance for proper scrutiny. So I'd like to know a bit of the reasons why it's coming so late, really, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, well, before I bring Claire back into answer, I'll let you answer a couple of questions. So Lucy, over to you, and then Claire can answer about why the urgency and the need for it to be brought. Lucy, your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I remind people that I have an interest. I don't have a personal interest, but I'm a rep on the museum board. And one of the things that I've really appreciated from the museum board and the management of the museum is their continued search for becoming more self-reliant in terms of their finance, and they have done a lot of creative things to do that, which not just this has been delayed for this summer. So I think that the decision a few years ago to transfer the museum service into a freestanding trust was a good decision by the council. It's given the museum service opportunities to do things that it hasn't done before. And I think we're right to support it as a continuing asset for the city. I'm also slightly cautious that this particular project has been sold very much as being the site of the world's first factory, but one of my constituents has been doing research into this, and he's pointed out there's actually an earlier silk mill that was set up in Italy, and also one down in Gloucestershire, and there's apparently questions now being asked about whether this was the first integrated manufacturing facility, because there may have been others. But ours, I think, is the city where we have this continuous history of 300 years of manufacturing, and I think that is definitely something that we should be celebrating.
Okay. Do you have a question?
So my question is hang on, are we, as this is a COVID-19 cost, which may not be directly to us, but we are paying out because of COVID-19, is it something that we're going to be able to ask the government to help us to fund? So that might be a question to Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Lucy. Are there any more questions for Claire? If not, I'll ask Claire to come back. Okay, Claire, two questions. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Upton. The COVID-19 costs are being collated. Any costs that we generate or any income that we also lose are being put onto a spreadsheet for the council, and that can be reviewed in the wider COVID-19 world, if you like, by our key finance colleagues. We're anticipating at the moment that we will take this funding from our capital contingency for the capital amount, and also the loan we anticipate being paid back. So the only amount that we would be talking about COVID-19 related would be the capital amount of up to 364,000. The late element to the paper, do apologise, and thank you ever so much for everybody's consideration of the paper at this evening's scrutiny. The reason was that we are hoping to secure additional external funding to support completing the construction of the project. And other external funding is likely to be contingent on the council showing a commitment to the project by committing funding itself. And we were asked if we could look to consider that this week and to consider the amount that's in the report. So our requirements have been to try to meet that request in order to try to secure other additional funding for the project, and we are hopeful that that might be the case, and therefore was worth bringing the late paper at short notice. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. Lucy asked, will people support endorsing this to Cabinet? Are people, what's being asked of us here, Stephen? Hello, is Stephen there?
Hi, Chair.
Yeah.
Unless you're putting forward any recommendations to Cabinet on this matter, then you would note the report, Chair.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's just for noting. Okay.
Chair, this was my request. Is that I feel it shouldn't be me promoting this, but if we think it's a good idea, if Exec Scrutiny thinks this is a good idea, it will do the project no harm to say to Cabinet, we endorse this.
Absolutely, I'm more than happy to endorse it. Are people happy to endorse it? Any dissent from endorsing it? Because I think we ought to do. No, there's no dissent from that, so we're all supportive of it. If we can both accept and endorse, please, and urge recommendation is accepted by Cabinet. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you very much for your consideration. Good night.
Good night. Moving on, item 10, compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. Is that Simon? Are you taking that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a standard. This is a standard report. It's asked permission to extend this scheme for a further year in line with Department for Transport funding. Happy to take any questions.
Move as printed, Chair.
Okay, if everybody's happy with that, we'll move as printed. Thank you very much. Item 11, Council Delivery Plan Monitoring, Q4. This is basically who's taking this? Hello?
Hi. Thank you, Chair. I will take that item if that's possible. I'll just stop my video for you.
Sarah?
It is. It's Sarah Walker, Policy and Improvement Manager. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. So the report presents executive scrutiny with the standard performance outturns as at the end of March 2020, so represents our Q4 position. Members of the committee are asked to note that this is obviously the first year that we've reported on both the priorities contained within the delivery plan in terms of priority performance measures and also milestones, and we've included priority projects alongside our strategic risks. The recommendation to Cabinet is to note the latest performance position, paying particular attention to our strategic risks and emerging priorities. So very quickly, I will just pick out some highlights for you. So at the end of quarter 4, 54% of our priority performance measures had improved from the end of March 2019. 71% of our supporting delivery plan actions had been evaluated as either completed or on track, which is consistent with last year. We had 15 priority projects that were rated as either green or amber green, and we have 16 strategic risks, which represents an increase of 3 risks from the quarter 3 position. And from a control perspective, 98% of our identified controls are in place, with all risks having additional actions identified to further mitigate and reduce the risks. Members are referred to paragraphs 4.3 to 4.20 for a summary of performance outturns as it stood at the end of quarter 4, and a full overview of performance is set out in Appendix 1. The final page of Appendix 1 just highlights that there are a number of items where reporting was impacted by COVID, so obviously we will pick that up as part of the quarter 1 performance report as we move forward. So I'll pause there if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I would respectfully remind members, this is simply to note, as it's not our role to scrutinise as such. If there is any need for scrutinising, that's up to the individual scrutiny and review boards. But I will take your questions, Stephen, on this. Stephen Willoughby.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm happy not to. I'm happy to leave it to the scrutiny board, Chair. But I've just got a couple of things really on the first bit on paragraph 4.1. You talk about sort of key projects being green or green amber. So I just wondered where we talked earlier about the assembly rooms and the waste plants, so where they fit into that. Paragraph 4.5, it talks about the climate change working group. So it'd be interesting to know how often that has met. And I think I've got a question on 4.9. But I think the risk register is going to come up at audit and accounts in a few weeks. So I'll probably just leave, bearing in mind what you've said, Chair, I will leave that question to there. And the only other one is, Sarah, just to make sure that paragraph 4.21, when is the risk management and strategy, risk management handbook and strategy going to be ready? Because I see it's referred to in a later item, this sort of council's annual report as well. And obviously, I think we committed that they were going to come before the Audit and Accounts Committee for sort of agreement or sort of perusal, as it were. So I just wanted to see when they're going to be ready and when we can get those into Audit and Accounts. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Okay, right. So the report is there for noting. We'll pick issues up at the individual scrutiny and review boards. So it's just for noting. Are members happy with that, for noting?
So we're going to answer the questions, Chair.
Would you like me to respond, Chair?
Yeah, okay. Do you want to come back, Sarah?
Yep, so in terms of the priority projects, they're reflected within Appendix 1. So there's a risk, obviously, for SINFIN. It's identified as a strategic risk within our risk register, and it's appropriately reported as such. In terms of the assembly rooms, that was identified, obviously, as a priority project at the start of the financial year. It was reported as on hold at the end of quarter 3. It is reflected within Appendix 1, but there isn't an update, obviously, because that project was paused, but for completeness, it is contained within the report. In terms of the climate change working group, obviously the lead officer would have more information on that. I understand that the group has met at least once to inform the development of the draft document, and that will also get picked up through our COVID-19 recovery plan. In terms of the risk management handbook and strategy, the commitment was that we would intend to update that for the quarter 4 report for audit and accounts. The anticipation is that will become through as part of quarter 1. Councillor Willoughby, unfortunately, it's just been delayed due to COVID priorities, but we've completed the review. Members of the committee had the previous documents for comments, and all of that will be built in to obviously the refresh. So it's just a case of refreshing those documents, but we can pick that up at audit and accounts if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that.
Thank you.
Okay, the report is for noting. Are members okay with that? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 12. Are you going to take this, Sarah, or is Paul?
I will take this if that's okay. This presents Audit and Accounts Committee with our draft annual report for 2019-20. So we don't have a statutory responsibility to publish an annual report, but it is good practice to do so. It allows us to communicate both internally and externally some of our key achievements, both in relation to the Council Delivery Plan, but the annual report actually considers activity outside of the Council Delivery Plan. So that's a key distinction from the Q4 report. It does present a summary of financial information at the back of the document, and alongside Appendix 1 to the report, which is the overview annual report, there is a detailed analysis of progress against the commitments that we did make in the Council Delivery Plan to ensure that both aspects are covered. So it's obviously going to Cabinet for consideration. Is there any questions in relation to that report?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Are there any questions? Any questions at all to Sarah?
Yes, please, Chair.
Okay, Lucy.
I was wondering how much there's been liaising with the marketing people to pull out elements of this as a way of promoting particular angles, the things that we'd like people to know about and maybe behave differently. And the two that I'd like to highlight is one, as I've mentioned before at this meeting, fostering and the opportunities that people have for fostering. And secondly, would be waste, because I understand that the level of waste arisings has gone up significantly during the lockdown period. And I would hope that we could use this sort of information as a way of promoting those sorts of things, and no doubt a number of others over the next week or so. Is that already planned in, or is that something that we should be encouraging Cabinet to do?
Would you like me to respond to that, Chair?
Yes, please, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have, in the development of this document, we've obviously liaised with a variety of stakeholders, including our communications colleagues, and one of the plans is following the publication, we will look to widen out our marketing communications activity in line with the achievements. There's lots to be proud of within this document that I think we should pause and reflect whilst there are ongoing priorities for improvement, some of which Councillor Kerr, you've just mentioned, but that is something that we've already picked up and we will be taking forward.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, there's no more questions on that, so we'll do thanks, Sarah. And then what we'll do, we are going to, I think that's the end of business, apart from the paper that needs to be heard in the private session. Stephen, do you want to take us through and read the actual script that you have to read?
Hi, Chair. Yep, I can take us through that. So first of all,
go away.
For you the members to consider a resolution to exclude the present public, that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the present public be excluded from the meeting during the discussion of the following item on the grounds that involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Are we okay with that? Yeah, thank you. How do you actually enact that, Stephen?
Well, now I'm just waiting for an indication from one of my colleagues, I think it's Dominic, that the broadcast has been